everyone. Welcome back to Jeddzpodcast. It's Jed Manson here. Thanks for tuning in and listening wherever you're watching this or listening in from. This is episode 43. I've got a very special guest in, Mick Delaney, joining me on the podcast. Mick, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on, mate.
Thank you, Jed. I appreciate the invitation, mate. I've been a long-time listener and finally get the chance to feature on one of your podcasts, mate. Excited for the opportunity.
It's great to have you back on. Let's get stuck into the show, mate. The first question is, can you tell us how you got into Aussie rules football?
Oh, mate, as a young fella in Lakes Entrance, I grew up in, so played some junior footy down there, and then, sort of with work and what have you, moved into Melbourne to play a bit of footy in Melbourne, and then went across to Perth and had the opportunity to play a little bit over there, and then back to Victoria, and then with work, it sort of moved me around the place, got the opportunity to play some footy in Gippsland, and now settled with the family in Bendigo, where we met each other through the Strathfield Safe Footy Club in the Bendigo League.
Yeah, that's right. It's always a great way to get involved into the community, especially through our local sporting clubs. Is there something you could share with us that most people would know about you?
Oh God, you've hit me on the head there with that one. Let's say that my nickname is Horse, and it's not for any reason other than when I was a young fella, I went on a trail ride and I fell off a Clydesdale. So that's where I got the nickname Horse.
I actually didn't know that until I was watching your own podcast the other day, which we were chatting about later on in the show and episode. And when I was watching your one in during the week, I was sort of like, where the hell is this game come from? But
yeah,
that makes sense, mate. You doing any coaching this year or not?
No, unfortunately not. So I finished up coaching in 2021. So the last couple of years I have had it off, and coaching during COVID was a difficult time, and not just for me personally, but for everyone in the Bendigo and outer communities with the restrictions that were put in place. It did take a bit of a toll, and with a young family, I've sort of gone away from coaching footy now and spend a little bit more time with them, but also, as you said earlier, I've got my own podcast that I do in my own time, where that does take up a little bit of time, but again, just being able to talk about footy and still being involved that way, it's a good opportunity for me to still do something that I enjoy, but without being hurt every week or pulling up with a bloody injury or something like that.
Absolutely, mate. So obviously you coached during COVID up at the Whycheproof football and netball club.
That's right.
What was the experience and opportunity like for you to be a senior coach up there?
That was really good. I really enjoyed my time at Whycheproof. A really good local community, so a small country community, which is about an hour and 40 minutes northwest of Bendigo. There's about 500 people in the town, but it draws all the people back who have ever been a part of the club because they're so focused on looking after their own. So with clubs like that, you more often than not find that people who move into Bendigo, the people that move into Melbourne, they're happy to do the 2, 3, 4 hour drive to go back home to play footy. So that community connection was a real highlight for me. And the footy level, like, you think somewhere when you're in the middle of nowhere that it might drop off quite quickly, but there's some really good senior footballers that play in that area, and the talent is quite good. The level is quite high.
Yeah, so how did you find the travel part of it, mate, for obviously training and then game days? Because it's a massive commitment for any coach, especially when you're not locally from that area with travel-wise and that.
Yeah, you're right. So once a week we would train in Bendigo. So we were training at the North Bendigo Football Oval on Monday nights. So they were good enough to allow us to train there. And then on Thursday nights, we'd travel up to Whycheproof and train together as a group. So the Caliana Special School were great to us and donated a bus to us each week, where we would borrow the bus and load it up with players, not just footballers, but netballers as well from the Bendigo area. And we'd travel up together. We'd train netball and footy together and then hang around and have a meal with the local community. On a Thursday night, we'd do our teams and then travel back in the evening. So they made for sometimes long nights, but they're not really long nights when you're spending it with good people.
For sure. That's wonderful to hear that a local school in Bendigo were able to provide that opportunity and support to everyone involved at Whycheproof.
Absolutely. And our good friend Peter Bush, shout out to him. Lovely fella. He was fantastic in affording us the opportunity to be able to do that.
That's great to hear, mate. I hear the Whycheproof bakery is pretty nice up there, is it? Good food.
I spent a fair bit of time in there, mate. Yeah, it's a bloody great feed. If you're going through there from Bendigo to Mildura anytime soon, I definitely recommend you stop in there and grab yourself a pie or sausage roll. They are delicious.
Definitely is a great bakery. I've been up there once myself. Is there a favourite footy story that you've got, and can you tell us why that might be your favourite football story, mate?
I don't really have one favourite footy story. I think my time in Melbourne and Perth were really fun. I got to meet some really cool people and play at a pretty good level. But I guess, as is with every footy club, you meet some good people, and the friendships that you form within those communities are what drives, or what used to drive me to be a part of a local footy club. So work has always come first, and when you're being paid to work, you've got to make sure work's at the forefront and being able to provide for your family. But when you're talking footy, you do need that time to do stuff that you enjoy doing. And I was fortunate enough to be involved with quite a few communities as I moved around the state with work, where they were just great. Like, they were easygoing, fun people. They enjoy a beer, they enjoy a good time. And I guess as I was saying earlier, it's not just one memory that stands out in my mind, but I guess I've got several memories of just being surrounded by good people and supportive people that make it just a fun time whenever you're at the footy. That's
the great thing about supporting clubs, Mick. Obviously, it's not so much the on-field stuff about winning or being out there, obviously, who can kick the most goals or whatever.
That's right.
It's actually about the off-field stuff where everyone comes together on a Saturday night for a club function or a Saturday afternoon after the game. It's wonderful to see that so many people are involved in their community clubs and enjoying themselves for much
That's right.
of the time. What's your current thoughts, mate, on the AFL concussion protocol? So currently, at the moment, as we talk, in the AFL, it's 12. It's 12 days. Player is mandatory out of the game now. But in local footy this year, the AFL's changed the concussion protocol. So it used to be 12 days last year for local footy, but it's now changed to 23 days. Do you think there's been enough done currently, in your opinion, mate, or do you think we need to do more as a game and as a society to protect players' well-being for long-term future?
Yep. I think the changes that have been implemented by the AFL are positive in the way forward. And this is only my own personal opinion, I don't agree with the 23-day having to sit out if you've suffered a concussion, because some people can recover from injuries, illnesses, concussions quicker than others. So it should be, without it being a mandatory 23 days, I'm all for making it a mandatory 10 days where you've got to have the next week off to ensure that your health and fitness is fine, and moving forward there's no concerns. But I would be more of the opinion that it would be that you'd have to get signed off by a doctor, for example, that once you pass your 1 week, then if you were fit to play again, that you'd have a doctor that would test you for your neurological symptoms, and if you're okay, then you're fine. Because in country footy, mate, as you know, in small communities, you don't have 50, 60, 70 players lined up to play. So if you've got someone sitting on the sidelines for 2 weeks that could play, but because there's the blanket 23-day policy, it may disadvantage people more than what it probably needs to. So even if it's to the point where they implement helmets or something like that, some soft padding to ensure that that player is being looked after, or all the players are being looked after. As I know, in junior footy, they're starting to make it compulsory that younger players wear helmets. I don't mind that either, because as a kid's growing up, you've got to look after the brain, you've got to look after the head area to ensure that there's no major damage moving forward. But I guess it's AFL, like, you, pardon my language, but shit happens sometimes. Like, you could get hit, you don't know where it's coming from. We have unfortunate circumstances, but just like in any sport, like cricket, you wear a helmet and sometimes you can still get hurt. In soccer, you know, two people go on the head of the ball and they head each other in the head and shit happens, you know. Like, it could happen in any sport. So while I understand they're trying to take the absolute risk out of it and minimise head injuries, with the nature of the beast, sometimes it can't be helped.
Well said, Mick. I agree with everything that you've just said there. Yeah, and I go back to with the concussion, obviously. Yeah, it's with the 23-day protocol. I can understand why the AFL have done it, but like you were just saying before, mate, it's in country footy, clubs don't have that luxury of, like, down at AFL or VFL level where they've got 60 players sitting on their list where they can bring blokes in. I know myself, I've seen it the last couple of weeks in Bendigo where there's teams that have had kids or senior players that have had concussions, but they may only have, let's say, 18 on their list, which is just enough to field a team. So when you end up with 2 players out in 2 weeks, that brings the list potentially down to 15, 16, and then they've got no bench and they are short. So it'd be interesting.
And then, potentially it opens up those other players that have to do more with no rest to other injuries, like doing hamstrings or, you know, exhaustion type injuries. Like, I just feel like they've got to get the balance right with that.
For sure. Do you think with their concussions, mate, in local footy, potentially in finals, that we may see players that if they're a week off or 2 weeks out from playing their grand final, are they going to turn around and say, no, I'm right, I don't have concussion, so they can play, because they now know that it's 3 weeks in local footy from when the incident.
Unfortunately, yes, you will see that, and it's unfortunate because as footballers, and like I've been there before, and you've played as well, mate, you want to be able to play every week, and if it comes down to the crunch time and you get injured or a head knock in a preliminary final, so to speak, and you don't want to give up your spot in the team for a grand final, I feel like that's probably putting the player in more danger, you know. Or if it happens in a semi-final and you have the week off and then you're playing, like if it's that blanket 10-day rule, then they would be okay. It would give them enough time to recover in time for a grand final. But yeah, I think 23 days is probably a bit too much.
Absolutely, mate, for sure. It'd be interesting if there's changes made again in the future by the AFL, which I'm sure there will be. It also happened last week. We know Nathan Murphy was another prime example. Sad story at the age of 24, 58 games roughly, and only played in a grand final last year's forced to sadly retire early from
that's unfortunate, isn't it? He's a ripping lad, and best wishes to Nathan Murphy and what he decides to do in the future. I think he'd be great as an AFL ambassador with what he's been through and how he's made the difficult decision to call time on his career at such a young age. But it sounds like he's got a really good head on his shoulders, and no doubt whatever he chooses to do, he'll do well at.
Sure does, and it's the same with I spoke with Paddy McCartan about 2 or 3 years ago, roughly. I was lucky to sit
right.
and chat with him about his concussions and head knocks. Do you think there's currently been done enough in the game to, we know in pretty much all local footy at the moment, Mick, that clubs and leagues are struggling to get umpires. Do you feel they're being supported enough at local level? Nah, I don't.
No, I don't. No, I think one change I'd probably like to see the AFL implement is putting some sort of incentive in for past players to get involved in umpiring. I've always found as a junior and then as a senior player growing up and playing footy in especially country areas, the best umpires you have are those that understand the game and those that have played for a long time. So, one thing I'd like to see put to clubs is if they can offer packages or incentives to past players to be able to come back, attract them back to the game and umpire a game that they used to play. Again, like they're the ones that understand the game. They understand what happens behind the scenes. And instead of being book smart, they've got the actual experience to know exactly what's going on. So, yeah, that would be one thing I'd probably look out for.
Do you feel with the shortage of umpires, mate, that people aren't wanting to umpire because they're putting up with a lack of respect from players, but not just players, but coaches and supporters during game days?
Yes. Long story short, yes, it's a lot better than what it used to be. Even just playing 3-4 years ago, mate, to listening the type of abuse that they used to cop over the boundary. As a player, used to think far out, like I'm used to this being directed at me, not at an umpire, but because again, they're just volunteering their time to officiate a match that we can all participate in. So it's unfair that they cop the abuse that they do. I understand that they're an easy scapegoat for an easy decision or a decision that may not go a certain team's way, or like we're human. We're all going to be judgmental. We're all going to be opinionated. We're all not going to agree on the same decision, but people need to realise that they're the ones who are employed or the ones who are put in place to officiate that game, and their decisions just need to be respected.
Umpires do a great job without any umpire or match officiator. There's definitely no game of footy on the day.
That's right.
Who's your tip and who do you think will win the AFL 2024 Brownlow, and why do you think that they may win it for?
At the moment, I'm tipping Isaac Heaney. He's been phenomenal so far this year, and make no mistake about it, he has been the number one player for Sydney, who have started the year on fire at the moment. Who do I think will win the grand final? I think GWS. I think when they're healthy, they are probably the most exciting team to watch. They're a bit injury-riddled at the moment with who they've got out. Canelio, Taylor, Toby Green with suspension, Jesse Hogan with suspension. But on any given day, when they're on, they're as dangerous as any other team.
Yeah, I think the Giants are also going to be the team to beat for the season and for the grand final. I know there's been a lot of talk around Carlton especially the last 2 years, which they have been playing some good footy, but I think the Giants are going to be the team to beat. I don't love the Blues.
As an Essendon supporter, I just can't pick Carlton, mate.
Nah, Carlton and the Pies aren't for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously, I want to now chat to you about your podcast, mate. Can you tell us how you got into it and what yours is about?
Yeah, cool. So my podcast is called the Insight Fantasy Sports Podcast. So we cover a wide range of sports. So AFL, NRL, BBL, NBL, NBA, NFL, you name it, we cover it. So we've currently got just over 2,500 subscribers on YouTube and roughly just over 3,000 on Spotify and just over 2,000 on Apple Store or Apple Podcast, sorry. So slowly starting to build a brand that way. We've been going for roughly 15 months and alongside four of my mates who coincidentally I'm the only one in Victoria. So with Nath, who in early 2010s did some tours of India and New Zealand with Australia A. He used to be a Australian leg spinner and played some cricket with New South Wales in the Sheffield Shield. So he looks after our NRL and our BBL. So him and I run our BBL shows. We got Matty O'Brien in Queensland. So he looks after our NRL and NBL shows. We have Matthew Garrett, who lives in inner Sydney. He's our NBA professional. And we have Jake Skidmore, who's currently hosting, as you would have seen the other night, the AFL podcast with and also runs the NBA with Matty Garrett. So we got the idea through COVID, much like you, mates. So, pardon me, we used to get on the Zoom calls and the FaceTimes, and when we couldn't go out anywhere, we used to have a beer together, sitting in our lounge rooms, just talking shit, what have you. And it came up just in conversation one day that, hey, we should, do a podcast, talk about sports, what we do. And yeah, over the course of 12 months, we sort of started teetering around the edges with social media and all that sort of stuff. And the NRL boys got theirs going, and I started the AFL last year. And then it's just slowly built momentum now into, what it is now. So much like yourself, mate, we've got merchandise, we've got sponsors, we've got a lot of people who tune in, getting, your 200 or 300 each week live on our episodes who come and ask us for questions or advice in regards to the fantasy element of these sports. We've got a Discord channel, all that sort of jazz. So, we thoroughly invite anyone who loves their sport to be involved in it. And the best part of all, it doesn't cost you anything. So you can just join up, have a chat with us, and really we're just talking, like yourself, we just talk footy.
That's great, mate, that you and your mates have got your own podcast, and especially to have all them other sports that you were just saying, like basketball, and that's great that there's a variety of things that people can tune in and listen to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have a favourite podcast episode so far?
As in from mine? Or
for podcast, sorry, mate.
Yeah, so last year I was lucky enough to get an old friend of mine, Clay Smith, who played in the 2016 Western Bulldogs premiership side. So he came on and we talked footy. While he was playing footy, what he's doing now in retirement. He's taken on a boxing career now, and he's doing quite well at that, still living in Melbourne, and he's coaching the Point Cook Senior Footy Club, and they're going quite well. So that episode was quite good. With NBA, the likes of Josh Lloyd and Dan Titus, for those of you that listen to NBA podcasts, not just in Australia, but around the world. So Dan Titus is tied in with Yahoo. Josh Lloyd has lockdown basketball in Australia. Having some big names on our podcast, being able to talk to us about the sport that they love so much is kind of cool and helps us sort of understand the games a little better. So hopefully moving forward, we're able to get some more special guests on the show. But given that we are fantasy relevant when it comes to, like with AFL, it's Supercoach. With NBA, it's fantasy. We try and stick to those fantasy relevant numbers and statistics, so then we can give people the best opportunity at winning their cash leagues and winning money for themselves.
That's cool, mate. That's awesome. Final question for you, Mick. Are there any is there any interest / hobbies that you have outside of football in general?
Yeah, I think now that I've had a couple of years outside of footy, I think I'd like to get back into it eventually, especially once my kids get old enough to want to play. I do like footy. I do like basketball. I do like cricket. The podcast does take up a little bit of time, and I enjoy that. And like you get to meet some cool people through that, so that's kind of cool. But I love just as much as anyone else just going down to the local footy, having a couple of beers, talking to some friends, and watching the local talent that we've got on offer here in Bendigo, Jed. Because man, we've got some some seriously talented footballers here in Bendigo that have gone on to do some wonderful things. For example, Harley Reid, he's taking the AFL by storm at the moment, mate.
Absolutely. He's killing it over at West Coast, especially for a young kid that's only just turned 19 recently. It's pretty impressive, and he's got
Isn't it?
He's got a lot more to offer in the future for sure.
And even when was it 2019 when we were coaching and you were running the water and we had Jack Ginnivan running around with us before he got drafted to Hawthorn. Do you remember that?
Yeah, sure do. And now the premiership player, mate. Well, was at Collingwood.
Yeah, at Collingwood, and now doing a pretty good job at Hawthorn.
Yeah, I've been impressed with his season so far down there.
Yeah, absolutely, mate.
Well, thank you, Mick, for coming on this episode, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you about footy and the podcast that you're involved in.
Thank you, Jed. I appreciate the invite, mate. And how about I return the favour and I get you involved in one of our AFL episodes in the coming future so we can show your fans exactly how much you know about AFL and showcase it to the world, mate, that you have got a pretty good AFL brain.
No worries. Sounds good, mate. That would be great to join you guys on your podcast. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and listening. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned for the next podcast to come shortly in the future. Take care. Bye for now.